My name is Alistair Lee. In this video, I'm going to walk through the process of getting started with an Adobe Connect trial. This process is going to begin after you receive your trial email from Adobe with your credentials, and that should include your account URL, which after your trial can be customized to your company name.adobeconnect.com, your username, which should be your email address that you registered for the trial with, and a temporary password you can use. So let's begin. I'm going to copy my temporary password into my clipboard and navigate to the URL provided in that email. And I'll log in with my username and password. After you've logged in, it will take you to Adobe Connect Central. This is the web application that we use to create any content on the Adobe Connect server, including new meetings, upload content to a shared content library that all of our users can access, create training and learning content, whether that's synchronous training through a live virtual classroom or on-demand asynchronous content like a course or a curriculum, as well as webinars through our event management portal. On Adobe Connect Central, you'll also see a tab for resources, and if you're a new user, this is a great tab to get started with. We've got some additional tools, a connection test, and other resources to help you get started. We've got online help, which you can use to learn more about Adobe Connect. You can visit our user community, which has got hundreds of tutorials, user forums, news, and events, as well as a link to the documentation for Adobe Connect. Up at the top here, I've got buttons to create new content, and these buttons change dynamically based on my role in the server. Because I'm an administrator, I've got access to create a brand new meeting room, new content, or new learning content. Any new meetings I create will show up in the Meetings tab under the My Meetings folder. And as an administrator, I can access all of the different user meetings folder by clicking on User Meetings, or create meetings in the Shared Meetings folder if I want multiple meeting hosts to be able to administer a single meeting room. For now, I'm going to click on the New Meeting button to create a new meeting room inside of my meeting folder. And we'll call this My First Meeting. And we can give it a custom URL. This is something that will help me remember my meeting room, and it is persistent like the rest of the Adobe Connect meeting itself. That means not only do I not have to schedule this meeting every time I want to use it, I can simply visit this URL and my room will be waiting. But actually all of the content inside of that meeting room will also persist. So if I'm uploading presentations or taking notes, those presentations and notes will persist every time I use the meeting room until I decide to delete them. So it's a good idea to use a memorable URL as you're creating your first meeting room. I'm going to use my first name because that's something I can remember. There are a lot of other fields and options on this new meeting wizard. I can go through and set some time options, set the language and access, but there's really only one mandatory field on this page, and that's giving your meeting a name. Once we've set up a name and given it a custom URL, we can scroll to the bottom and hit Finish to create our meeting room. Now that I've created my meeting room, I can either click on the URL that I've created or this Enter Meeting Room button to launch my meeting room. My meeting room has just opened up, and I can see that I've got a number of different pods on my stage, and these pods are used to deliver the functionality of Adobe Connect. So for example, I've got a share pod here that I can use for sharing my screen, or uploading documents to that share pod, like a PowerPoint document or a PDF, can be uploaded directly to the Adobe Connect room, so I'm not having to share my screen. I've got a video pod I can use to share my webcam, an attendees pod that shows me who's in my room and what role they're playing in my room, as well as a chat pod that I can use to chat with other participants, either publicly or privately. And all of these pods are available in the pods menu, along with quite a few that I don't have on my current stage. If I wanted to add a new pod, for example, a file share pod, so people could download files that I'm making available, I simply select it from that pods menu. And all of these pods are movable and resizable. So anything that I do here is synchronized with everybody else in my meeting room. If I resize a pod and move it over to the left-hand side, everybody else sees that same experience. They get the same meeting room experience that I set up. And in this way, I can control the look and the feel of my meeting room. If I want all of these pods to be on the left-hand side, I can move them over to the left-hand side. Every pod has also got a pod options menu, and this menu changes based on the pod. Each of these pods have different functionality, but they all have an option to hide the pod. And so if I want to remove a pod from my stage, I can simply select hide. If I want to rename a pod, I can double-click the title and give it a new name. And if I want to bring back a pod that I've already hidden, I can do that by going up to the pods menu. And for example, that file pod is available here. You can see when I select files, I can bring back the pod called a new name or add a new file share pod to my stage. So these layouts really control the functionality as well as the look and the feel of your Adobe Connect meeting room. But a lot of meeting rooms can be made up of more than one set of pods. And for this reason, we've got something called layouts. On the right-hand side, I can see something called the layout bar. And this layout bar lets me switch from one set of layouts or one layout to another. And my default meeting room has got 3 default layouts, one called sharing, one called discussion, and another called collaboration. And as you can see, these layouts are simply prearranged sets of pods that I've got on my stage. If I want to delete one of my layouts, I can simply click on the X in the top right-hand corner of that thumbnail and delete it. If I'd like to create a brand new layout, I can click on the plus symbol in the bottom of my layout bar and create either a completely blank layout, which I can then populate with pods from the pods menu, or duplicate an existing layout if I want to start with some pods already on my stage. Many of our customers use layouts to structure their meetings. So they'll have a lobby layout, an intro layout, a slides layout, and a screen share layout, and maybe a Q&A layout. And they move from one layout to another as they move through their meeting room. Other customers like to have different layouts for the different ways they use their room. They might have a marketing layout for when they're meeting with the marketing people, and an engineering layout for when they're meeting with engineers. How you use your layouts is completely up to you, but take the advantage of customizing your room and personalizing it to make it yours. One more tip in that direction. Under the meeting menu, look for preferences, and using this general preference, you can upload your own custom wallpaper image or custom background to your Adobe Connect room to personalize it even further. Okay, so we've set up our room, we've played with the layouts and the pods. The next thing we're going to take a very quick look at is adding new users to the system. And we do that through administration. I'm going to click on the administration link, and this is something that only you'll be able to access as an Adobe Connect administrator. We can add multiple users all at once by clicking on the users and groups and then the import link. And this way we can upload a comma-separated values file with all of the different usernames and passwords and groups inside of that file. Or we can add them individually by going back to users and groups and clicking on the new user button. As we do that, we'll not only be able to add a new user, but assign the groups to that user that they should belong to. And we can set up our own groups if we want to organize our user directory based on maybe location or role, for example, having a sales group and a marketing group. But you'll notice that out of the box with your trial, there are a number of system groups that are already available. And these groups determine the roles and the rights and privileges for all of the different users in the system. As you created your new trial, you were automatically added to all of these different groups so that you had access to all of the different Adobe Connect features. But as we're adding new users, we'll have to determine which groups we want to add them to give them the appropriate rights. So, for example, if we wanted somebody to be able to create their own personal meeting rooms, we would add them to the meeting hosts group. If we wanted somebody to be able to manage training content, we would add them to the training managers group. Let's set up a new user by clicking on the new user button and adding their first name, last name, email address, and password. Now, by default, email addresses are used for the login to the Adobe Connect system. I'd recommend keeping that default. Everybody's already got a unique email address, and it's a mandatory field since we need to be able to send them their account information. But if you want to use usernames instead of email addresses, you can change that under administration. Let's give Conrad a password. We can choose to send him his credentials. He will have a slightly different experience, a more user-friendly experience as a new meeting user in the system. He'll be guided automatically to set up his own personal meeting room. We can also prompt Conrad to change his password after he logs in, so he's got a more secure password. By the way, if you do want to change your password policies, that's something else you can do in administration. You can create policies around the complexity and the length and duration of all of the passwords that are being set up on the system. So that's how we add new users. One of the things a lot of our users will want to do, though, is use audio with their Adobe Connect meeting rooms. And to enable them to use audio so that as they record their meetings, the audio is recorded, they'll need to set up an audio profile. To do that as an administrator for this trial, I'm going to go into audio providers while still remaining under the administration link and enable one or two audio providers. And you can see that there are a number of different audio providers out of the box. If I want to enable one of these, I simply click on the audio provider. I will edit and enable, set the provider status to enabled, and then click Save. And this will make this audio provider available for my new users so that they can set up audio profiles. In other words, set up their own profile with their own conference ID and password. Now, if your organization uses an audio provider that's not an integrated audio provider out of the box, in other words, somebody you're not seeing here, you can set up your own. And this is something that you would want to do as an administrator to make sure it's available for all of the users of your system. You would do that by clicking on the New Provider button here, entering things like their name, their URL, and some of the toll-free numbers your users would use to dial in. And then a little further down the screen, there's actually a way to teach Adobe Connect how to use that audio provider. In other words, what numbers should Adobe Connect dial? How long should it wait in terms of a delay? When a user should enter their own information, something like a conference ID or a password that changes from user to user. All of those steps can be added in your audio provider setup. Then you, as well as all of your users, can edit your own profiles to add your own audio profiles. So in this case, as I go under My Audio Profiles, I can add a new profile. And this profile that I create now will be available for all of the different meeting rooms that I create. It's something that only needs to be set up once and then can be leveraged for the rest of your Adobe Connect account life. I would select a provider from the different providers I've enabled, type in my information, and then associate that with my meeting room under Preferences. So that's a quick look at getting started with an Adobe Connect trial, including creating your first meeting room, playing with layouts and pods, as well as setting up new users and setting up audio so that your users can record their meetings. I hope you found this valuable. Thanks for your time.